Hill. Let's bring in our panel tonight. David Drucker, senior editor for Roll Call. Mara Eliason, national political correspondent for National Public Radio, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, David, we are ahead of Wednesday's hearing in front of Congressman Issa, but now you have the State Department IG investigating the ARB. I mean, there's a lot of initials here, but basically the panel that the administration points back to as the defense in Benghazi.
Yeah, Brett, throughout this entire Benghazi odyssey, from the date of the attack until now, these fresh news reports are the first time I've really seen the potential for a major political problem for the administration, where you're going to have people asking questions, and the classic question, what did you know, when did you know it, and did you choose to obscure anything because it was going to be very inconvenient for the president's reelection? And I think part of this is going to depend upon what kind of investigation do House Republicans conduct. There are a number of House Republicans that are pushing the Speaker to support the creation of a special select committee, which would have subpoena power and all of that. And right now the Speaker and the chairman of the 5 committees are very resistant to this because they've been conducting for a while a joint investigation. And I think that there are a number of questions the administration is going to need to answer, and I really feel that as much of reporting that has been done and the questions that have been asked, this is the first time we've gotten to a point where it looks as though people may have voluntarily decided we don't really want to get into this because it could be problematic. And I think eventually the president's going to have to answer these questions more directly than he did this week.
Mara.
Yeah, well, we have to find out what these people have to say. It sounds like they're not contractors. They're actually career State Department employees. They will testify. They'll tell their story. And then the question will be, why were they turned away if, in fact, they did volunteer to be interviewed and wanted to be interviewed? I don't see why the ARB wouldn't have interviewed everybody who wanted to be interviewed, everybody who had any connection with the incident at all. So we'll see. Up until now, I would say this is an issue that hasn't gone away, but it also hasn't exploded into a kind of huge full-fledged scandal. But it has been very persistent and it hasn't disappeared.
Charles.
Well, I think it's important because the ARB, the State Department administration have clung to the ARB report as to a life raft. And they've also treated it like the gospel according to Matthew, as if anything that's in the ARB is okay. All the questions have been asked, all the questions have been answered. And that appears not to be so. I'm not sure I would accept the view right now that it was a cover-up. I don't see a motive, for example, for Admiral Mullen to conduct a cover-up on behalf of this administration, but it is possible that it was sloppy and incomplete and even cursory. I mean, if you don't interview the Secretary of State, then you are leaving something large out of this. And if it turns out there were people who are material witnesses who could have known stuff that was important, who were turned away rather than perhaps either ignored or there was some negligence involved. But if there was sort of active turning away as a way to protect the administration, then you've got a scandal on your hands.
You mentioned how the hearing on Wednesday is run. You know, we heard there have been a number of Benghazi hearings, and there's been a lot of criticism about how those hearings were run because of the questions that weren't asked. There were opportunities to ask different questions. So
I think that we will probably see more the joint House Republican investigation from Judiciary Armed Services and other committees, including Congressman Issa's committee, have more information at hand according to what they've released to us, information that they think implicates former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And so I think you're going to see a more aggressive posture and deeper questioning. And there is clearly more of a hunger for this, I think, from Republican voters, if you will, conservatives, to try and get to the bottom of this. And House Republicans are obviously very sensitive to what conservative activists want. And the fact that you simply now, with Fox News reporting this week, have a lot more questions to ask, Brett, that just didn't exist the last time these hearings were held.
Right. If you look, Mara, in that House document and the 5 committees report, it's not just vague terminology. I mean, they have specific emails with people's names on them and dates and times when the emails were sent. I mean, it's very detailed stuff in there.
I think the big question that the Republicans have been after was something that shows that Secretary Clinton knew that there were requests for extra security and denied those requests herself. That's what remains to be proven. There's been a big debate about whether, because her name was on some cables, apparently her name is on every single cable, whether she actually read it personally and reviewed it and answered it. But that's what we're waiting to see, and we'll see what happens next week when these people testify.
I also think that the talking points and the evolution of them, and how they, and the deputies meeting and how they kind of evolved was also a big point.
It's always three elements. What happened before, the warnings ignored. What happened after, which is the talking points, in which the Republican report is truly damning. And then what happened during the time. Is it true, as we heard from the special operator who spoke, in camera last week, that there was an opportunity to get rescue, and it was denied. So I think it's always remained the three elements, and those are the questions. And I think Republicans ought to be really careful to ask a question and not give a speech, to listen to the previous question and to follow up. And lastly, to treat everybody kind of an impartial way, looking for information, and being willing to accept human error and not assuming always the worst of motives, to make it a real inquiry into truth, and thus take away the argument that it's a political attack.
All right. Senator John McCain, by the way, will be on the record with Greta tonight talking about this subject and others. Next up, President Obama goes south of the border to push immigration reform.